Good afternoon to you. 506 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. The Republican Party just wrapping up a very successful convention this presidential election year. So successful that the Democrats on cable news are saying, wow, that was kind of impressive.
Hey, listen, hey guys, the last time I was in a convention that felt like this was Obama 2008.
Yeah,
There's something happening
You
where...
just wrote a headline, by the way.
What's that?
You just wrote a headline with that comment.
You just wrote a headline. Van Jones says he hasn't detected this kind of energy since Obama 2008, right there in that Republican convention in Milwaukee. For more on that, I want to bring in former Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin. He's the president of the Young America's Foundation, and he joins us now. Sir, good to have you back with us.
Hey, my pleasure. Glad to be with you.
What did you think of this convention? It seemed to me very high energy, perhaps the most energetic of our lifetime.
Without a doubt. I think it's one of the few times I'll agree with Van. I think it was unbelievable, particularly starting out the first day. You know, you've got J.D. Vance, who I think was an excellent pick. The media, we were on the floor in Milwaukee that day, the afternoon when it was announced on True Social, and they immediately swarmed me because Wisconsin's out in the front. And I said, obviously he's a Midwesterner, so I love that. But more importantly, the fact that this guy's life story, you know, raised by grandmother because his mother was a heroin addict, lived in abject poverty. These families like his are those that feel forgotten. That's exactly who Donald Trump stands up for, the forgotten men and women of this country. I thought it was a great connection. And then former President Trump comes out. Boy, I hadn't even seen anything like that, just how surreal that was, how amazing it was. It made me think back to when I was a kid and Ronald Reagan was shot. For a day or two later, he stuck his head out the hospital window, let everybody know he was okay. That sort of moment was amazing for all Americans.
Definitely. You know, it's funny. It was interesting. In addition to their worldviews, something that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump have in common is that at one point they were both revered by the left earlier in their lives. Donald Trump was for a very long time welcome among the establishment left. He was, Hillary Clinton was at his wedding, for God's sakes. They had that relationship. And in J.D. Vance's case, the left treated J.D. Vance as kind of the Sherpa to middle America. They made a Hollywood movie about J.D. Vance's life. But boy, how things have changed, haven't they?
That's exactly right. In fact, that's what I said on Monday. I hope people watch that Netflix movie. I think it's up like 1,000% on Netflix now. The book's #1 on the bestseller. It's really compelling because, as you know, we've talked about this before. In my state and all across the country, addiction transcends any political party. It transcends race. I think there are a lot of families watching on the north side in the central city, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who felt just as connected to J.D. and his family as those people watching in the most rural parts of America. Why? Because poverty and addiction know no boundaries. Yeah. And the fact that they feel forgotten is powerful to connect the dots, because that's what Donald Trump needs to win. That's what he did in 2016. People felt like he was looking out for them, even when most politicians aren't. That's, I think, the path to success in 24.
The emotion of this week was really strong. Night after night, we got to meet Americans who've been afflicted with all sorts of really shocking problems over the last few years. Among them, we got to meet the parents of children who had died from opioid overdoses, or we got to see the Gold Star families stand on that stage and talk about losing their loved ones. What did you think of how resonant those stories were, and to what extent did they speak to Americans who are observing across the country?
Well, that's just it. Again, as I mentioned, it's part of that great theme that Donald Trump is the person who's not about the established. He's not about tradition. It wasn't filled, there were very few politicians up on the stage. Instead, it was people whose lives have been affected, particularly negatively affected the last few years, and what they're doing to try and make it better. And all of them that you mentioned, plus, my goodness, the parents of one of the American hostages still held by Hamas. Story after story. The mother whose son was in the military made it home alive only to be killed here in America because of an illegal alien. Story after story after story. So amazing, the feedback and the pushback. Even one, honestly, I wasn't particularly fond of on the selection when I heard about it. just because of her background, Amber Rose, not because she's a rapper, because of other things. But even that was surprisingly effective to me when she said, I hated Donald Trump. I thought he was a racist until her father told her to check the facts, and she did, and now she feels at home supporting him. Really amazing stories every night of the convention.
To what extent, from your view, and you have a better perspective on this than most, is the Republican Party actually unified now behind President Trump? I mean, there have been some famous antagonists, Mitt Romney, Liz Cheney types. But if you look in that room at the convention, the ideological disparities, at least in the past, have been pretty wide. I mean, everybody from Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham all the way to J.D. Vance, President Trump himself, Tucker Carlson speaking there. To what extent do you think that the right has reached a moment of unity heading into this election?
Yeah, I mean, think about that image the other night up in the booth. You've got Speaker Johnson standing next to Congresswoman Bobbitt from Colorado and Congresswoman Mace, people who are all over the map, even in terms of who the House Speaker should be, all unified at that convention. I thought Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis' speeches the other night were really quite effective. Nikki, of course, is someone who served with me when she was governor in South Carolina and I was governor of Wisconsin. And it was really effective because it wasn't a pretend there's no tension speech. It was, here's what's at stake, here's what I saw, here's where we agree on things, and those things are far greater than whatever perceived or real differences we might have. That's the kind of thing that I think is really, really remarkable. Even some of the union leaders. I loved how the media swarmed on me the other night after the Teamsters president was up there. And to be clear, obviously I don't ascribe to all the initiatives he would like going forward, but I love the fact that he was there, and I love the fact that he was pointing out, how many people on the left have taken his members for granted. We're pro-worker. We want America to do better. Frankly, I don't care if they're union or non-union. We want American workers and their families to do better, and Donald Trump's the right person to do that.
Yeah, and the fact that the media swarmed you once again shows that they don't draw distinctions at all on anything. I mean, for instance, they'll talk about immigrants broadly, and they'll lump in both illegal aliens and legal immigrants. And the same thing is with unions. Your war in Wisconsin, the battles that you had, were with the public sector unions, and yet they make no distinction whatsoever between private and public sector unions.
They were shocked when I pointed out that the vast majority of the trade union members voted for me, and many of those unions actually supported me. Why? Because after 8 years, construction worker wages were up about 50% in Wisconsin. Because when you get the government out of the way, when you empower small businesses and employers to put people to work, it has an impact on the workers, not just on the people running those companies. And again, that's why I think you're going to see a growing number of blue-collar workers, kind of what we used to call Reagan Democrats, coming out for Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. As you look at the numbers, especially in a state like Wisconsin, what's changing about the electorate right now? President Trump clearly has all of the advantages now heading into the election. Should it be free and fair, it looks like he's going to win. But obviously, there's still a huge fight ahead, and nobody should rest on what the poll numbers say. But what do you see happening right now in the Midwest, across the country, in terms of how voters are changing in terms of their behaviors?
Yeah, Wisconsin is the state. A Democrat can't win the presidency without winning Wisconsin. Of course, in 2016, Trump won by a few thousand votes. In 2020, he didn't. That's the difference right there. What we see right now is that the far north, which historically had been open to Democrats, is now solidly behind President Trump, a solid Republican pickup, as it is in other more rural, in many cases, financially devastated areas. They've moved for Trump because they felt forgotten. The cities are still reliably Democrat, although we're making inroads in the black and Hispanic parts of places like Milwaukee. But really the key to where the polls have changed is that in 2016, Donald Trump, like most Republicans, did well in the suburbs of Milwaukee. In 2020, he didn't do as well because some of those voters didn't like the tone. It wasn't about the policy. It was the tone of that president, whether it was on X or other social media platforms or just in general. I think in the 4 years since, they've had buyer's remorse because of their families. Prices are higher for groceries, for gas, for housing. They're feeling it, and they're willing to concede that maybe they made a mistake. Add to that the debate, and they realize that they just can't justify voting for Joe Biden. But as I and others have said all week, don't presume that he's the nominee. And if that's the case, we can still win, but we've got to connect the dots that Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, anybody else, it's the same bad ideas that have us in an affordability crisis in this country, and we can't back down from that.
You know, I've been thinking, Governor Walker, as I look around, that if there's anybody that's persuadable still who's out there, this last week must have struck them as very persuasive because, one, you're watching as the Republican candidate for president survived an assassination attempt on Saturday. He spent the week kind of subdued, just watching everyone else give these great speeches at the convention. And then last night gave a very unifying, forward-looking speech where he barely mentioned his political opponent. The name only came up twice within the course of like 2 seconds. He mentioned Joe Biden, but that was it. What do you make of, you mentioned 2020 and Trump's tone. What do you make of his tone this cycle?
Well, I think there's no doubt it's reflective, but even before the would-be assassin's bullet was shot on Saturday, I think he had been smart enough and decisive enough to realize that Joe Biden was collapsing, his team was collapsing after that debate, and why step in the middle of them falling apart? And so I was, just very, very pleasantly surprised and felt like that was a great sign going forward. I, for one, back in May when they announced the debate, said this was going to be spectacular. Some people thought it was a setup. I said, no, he can't talk when it's not his turn. That's not only good because it tells those suburban voters he can be polite and listen, but more importantly, America will hear how bad Joe Biden is. And that's exactly what happened. But again, the party who's lectured us for 3.5 years about the sanctity of democracy and how every vote must be respected is now meeting behind closed doors trying to force the guy who won over 3,000 delegates votes in the primary and caucus season that he's got to step aside. So we can't presume it's going to be Joe Biden. If it's Kamala Harris, she's arguably worse on the issues, and we've got to make that case. So I thought Donald Trump was great. He was great this week. I thought it was great that he told us what was going through his mind the day of Saturday, the day of that shooting attempt. And I think America was open to hearing more from him because of it.
Yeah, very much so. All right, Governor Scott Walker, always nice to talk to you, sir. Thank you very much for your time today.
When I look out there and I see Donald Trump, I think about how his business was compromised. But what happened last week when they took a shot at my hero and they tried to kill the next president of the United States? Enough was enough. And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again.
That was Hulk Hogan last night at the convention. It was just wild. That was just wild. Hulk Hogan showed up. He not politically active, but a big Trump fan, and he just decided. He said when he saw the attempted assassination of Trump, he decided he needed to get involved. He's 70 years old. Can you believe that? That man is 70, and he's definitely got better guns than people who are less than half his age. And he stood up on that stage last night. He ripped his shirt off to show a Trump Vance shirt, in Hulk Hogan style. It was wild. He got the crowd all pumped up. Trump was super excited to see him there too. It was funny, and that was a great energetic moment. Now, so what are the Democrats going to do? At this point, right now, I think they're all looking for the Undertaker at this moment. Yeah, and not for the convention, just for Biden. And I'm not talking about the WWE guy either. No, yeah, they're. They must be flabbergasted. They have no idea what to do. Can you imagine? How would you even put together a Democrat convention at this point? What's that going to look like? Nobody knows. Nobody even knows who the nominee is going to be. It's crazy. All right, Chris is in Woodbridge, line 1. Chris, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. I just wanted to say that I hope we're not getting a little bit ahead of ourselves because we do remember the promised wave, the red wave of 18, 20, and 22 that didn't materialize. We have to remember that Trump is 1 point ahead of a cadaver, and that's within the margin of cheating. And if I just may add one thing, if that bullet had come any closer to Trump's head, we'd have 2 vegetables in the race instead of 1.
Yeah, it's wild. I agree with you on the point that the Republicans should not in any way get overconfident about what comes next, because it matters, certainly on the margins. It's like if you can basically convey to some small percentage of Republican voters, well, you don't even really need to show up. This thing's in the bag. Well, that could make all the difference. In a world where each of these elections are just decided by 20, 30,000 votes, it's critical that you get every single one of them to show up, isn't it?
And that's within the margin of cheating.
All right, we got to say goodbye. I'm sorry. You can't listen to yourself when you make the call. We got to shut down the radio so we can have the conversation. Thank you, though. I appreciate it, Chris. It's a good point. It's an excellent point. And so we should act like we are 10 points behind no matter what happens here. But it was a good week, though. I did like seeing this convention come together. It was really well done. And in a moment, I want to talk to continue to take your calls, but I want to talk about Corey Comperatore. He's the firefighter. They had a send-off for him today. Big funeral in Pennsylvania. And President Trump did such a nice job honoring his life last night on that stage. The left is trying to ruin it, of course, but we're not going to let them. That's ahead. Also, again, your calls on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hey, good afternoon to you. 534 here at News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. A funeral today for Corey Comperatore, the firefighter who was shot dead at that rally in Butler, Pennsylvania for President Trump this past week, as President Trump survived the assassination attempt. The New York Times says today that one by one this morning, people began to gather along the winding roads and cornfields to plant American flags, spread out their blankets, and wait for the fire trucks. They knew the nation was watching after the attempted assassination of former President Donald J. Trump thrust their corner of western Pennsylvania into the spotlight. But the day was about honoring a local man, Corey Comperatore, the volunteer firefighter and father of 2 killed in the gunfire on Saturday. Quote, "You couldn't comprehend that happened," said Michael Drain, 66 years old, who stood across the street from the funeral service to pay tribute to a man he had only known as a familiar face in the neighborhood. He blinked back tears as he recalled the violence on Saturday. Quote, "Not here, not home," he said. An emotional day as they send this man off. President Trump, during his remarks last night to the Republican National Convention, was very beautiful. It was very beautiful. First and foremost, he talked about the assassination attempt on him, but he was quick to point out that there was a man who was killed, Corey Comperatore. And in fact, the Republicans, what they had done was they were able to get a hold of his firefighter uniform, Corey's, that is, and his helmet, and they displayed it on stage right near President Trump, to his right, actually, and I think they actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think the distance of the uniform was approximately the distance from Trump when he was on stage last weekend, because they didn't put it right next to Trump. They could have. They put it at some distance. And now, again, this is literally just coming to me as I'm saying this. I was curious about the distance on the stage of the uniform. It may have been just as far as Corey actually was from President Trump when he took those shots, because it was on the same side that he was sitting, for sure. You could see President Trump had that bandage on his ear. That's where he was shot. And Corey was shot not far away from him, but to his right, to President Trump's right. So at one point in the speech, President Trump actually is paying homage to Corey, and he decides to walk over to the uniform, and he kisses the helmet in yet another jaw-dropping moment in certainly a week that has been full of them. Take a listen to the audio as this all went down.
But Corey, unfortunately, we have to use the past tense. He was incredible. He was a highly respected former fire chief, respected by everybody. was accompanied by his wife, Helen, incredible woman. I spoke to her today, devastated, and 2 precious daughters. He lost his life selflessly acting as a human shield to protect them from flying bullets. He went right over the top of them and was hit. What a fine man he was.
He stares at the uniform. He points. He walks away from the lectern, heading towards Corey's uniform. He embraces it, and he kisses the helmet. How heavy this must weigh on his heart to have survived that shooting and for that man to die protecting his family. It's just remarkable, honestly, to see. Now, there's something going around about this uniform, which is deranged. The left is insisting that it wasn't actually Corey Comperatore's jacket. This is the ghoulishness of all of this. They were claiming last night that the RNC invented this, that they had quickly had a jacket made and put it on stage, and in their hurry to use Corey's death as a way to get some sort of political advantage, that they had misspelled his name on the back of the jacket. Comperatore, it has an A in it before the end of the name. And on the jacket, you'll see that it doesn't share the spelling of his actual name. The A is missing on the jacket. And the left turned this into a huge conspiracy theory last night, and they've been running wild with it all day. And the reality here is, just in case you have a lefty friend who's buying into all this nonsense, is that the jacket only has so many space for letters. The name Comperatore is 11 letters long. If you look at the space where the last name is, it only fits 10 letters. So they had to make a decision. This is actually his jacket. They had to make a decision, and they narrowed it down. They just removed the A. In fact, in the New York Times' coverage today, they acknowledge this. They say the name on the jacket notably was misspelled and missing an A. This was because his name was too long for the jacket, said Melissa Stivers, adding that Mr. Comperatore was her nephew's godfather. Quote, his firefighter buddies would joke that he lost his A game, Ms. Stivers said, seated in her pickup truck ahead of the funeral procession. It was a running joke, and he never sent it back to get it fixed. So the name was right. This is his jacket. And yet another place where the left was conspiracy theorizing yesterday that, oh, that's not even his jacket. Oh, they just made this up. Oh, look at this. They misspelled his name. On and on and on. And it continues today. I'm watching as lefties are still contesting the idea that President Trump was even shot in the ear at all. And so this is just the way they handle these things. They can't process something that they're fearful that this is looking good for Republicans, so therefore they have to attack it. On MSNBC, this is Simone Sanders, lefty, of course, doing that very thing, suggesting that the name was misspelled and saying that the tribute itself was disgusting.
It was crazy. And also, I do just want to note, I was sickened by the prop that was Mr. Comperatore.
Well, exactly. Comperatore, yeah.
Comperatore. I was sickened by them using him as a prop, his firefighter jacket, and then they spelled the man's name wrong. And so he said, oh, we're so grateful that the fire department sent this to us. These are local dang on dollars, okay? This is not, Chicago Fire. Angela Bass ain't about to come out. They don't got their names on the back of the jackets. Like, who are you fooling? But then they put the name on it and they spelled it wrong. I was just kind of like, if we're gonna do props, like, let's at least get it right.
Is there a single thing she said over that time frame? That was 43 seconds. Was there a single thing she said that was correct? She has no idea what she's talking about. They put her on national television. She ran her suck for 43 straight seconds, and made up literally everything. She's like, this isn't Chicago Fire. They don't even put names on the back of firefighter jackets in these small podunk towns. That's her position. That the Republicans generated it. They misspelled his name. Everything she said was a lie. And she'll get away with it. And the whole table's all nodding along. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good. It's disgraceful is what it is. It's just awful that there are people who listen to that and take it seriously. Too much. Too much. All right, let me take some calls here. I've got Jim calling in from Illinois now, line 3. Jim, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Colonnade Show.
Hey, Vince. It's great to listen to you on the great WMAL. WLS here has fallen down. They don't have you in the afternoons.
Oh, well, they got Chris Plant in the morning, though. That's really critical, just so you know.
They do, and they do have Mark Levin. So
good.
And they do have some lineup. But they're still falling short.
All right, I don't want to pick on WLS. I'm just saying I've got great friends on that channel. All right, go ahead, sir. Tell me what's on your mind, though.
Okay. But you know what? What I see, and I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a therapist or anything, but just as a regular human who's had some close calls in my life.
Yeah.
What I see with Donald Trump is that he seems to be not suffering, but enjoying survivor's remorse, where he
what do you mean by
so
enjoy?
Empathetic. Well, because there's a blessing with that. Okay.
Yeah.
It's that you have such a respect for life. Okay. And even though he's a billionaire, all right, he would throw himself on a hand grenade, and he is for our country.
Right.
All right. He demonstrates that he feels like he would trade his life for this family and to have them have their husband, and their father. That he has such a compassion for life and for other people that you will not see in other politicians, in the majority of them.
Right.
There are so many egomaniacs. I've seen many. I've had encounters with them.
Yes.
They're egomaniacs. And what he's accused of being is just the opposite. He's a compassionate human guy.
For sure. And so you think that
respect for a human.
And you think that he has a brand new appreciation for the life that he has.
Well, he has respect for. Now he feels not guilt, but he has to try to make up for the loss of the person that passed away.
He's full of sorrow about that.
Person contributed. He contributed exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like a guilt, and it's gonna wear on him. But it's gonna. I hope he has somebody to support him and counsel him.
Yeah.
In a good way. I think faith is going to carry him through. But I'll tell you what, he feels that I think he's more determined than ever.
Yes.
That he has to make things right with the nation.
I think you're right. I think your instincts are right on this, Jim. Thank you. A smart point. Let me go from Jim's excellent call to this. This is Tucker Carlson spoke last night, and he had some observations about the shooting and the way Trump reacted to it, because he had a chance to actually talk to President Trump in the hours after. Listen to this.
But if you think about it, the presidency comes with great power, obviously. But if you think about it, that is a title that is bestowed by a process of some sort that can be subverted. And in the end, it does not confer by itself, as no title does, legitimacy. Just because you call yourself the president doesn't mean that much inherently. I can call my dog the CEO of Hewlett-Packard. It doesn't mean she is. It's true. And you hate to say it, but it is also true, as a fact, that you could take, a mannequin, a dead person, and make him president. No, you could. You could. I'm just saying theoretically possible. With enough cheating, that could happen. But being a leader is very different. It's not a title. It's organic. You can't name someone a leader. A leader is the bravest man. That's who the leader is. That is true in all human organizations. This is a law of nature. And in that moment, Donald Trump, months before the presidential election, became the leader of this nation. That was the most obvious to me. And I have to say, you know, I think it changed him. He reached out to Trump within hours of it that night. And what he said to me that night, having just been shot in the face, he said not a single word about himself. He said only how amazed he was and how proud he was of the crowd, which didn't run. And I thought two things. The first thing I thought was, well, of course they didn't run. His courage gave them heart. A leader's courage gives courage to his people. And the second thing I thought was, this is the selfish guy I've been hearing about for 9 years? Really? Not a word about himself? About his people, period. And the second thing I noticed, which I don't think anyone has remarked upon in public, but I'm just going to since I don't have a script, like why not, is that he turned down the most obvious opportunity in politics to inflame the nation after being shot. To inflame the nation, which is an opportunity that almost every other politician I've ever met, and certainly his opponents, would have taken instantly. And they would have said, well, what is this? How did he get shot? Like, how did this happen? And those are real questions that we have to get to the bottom of. But in the moments, the days, the week after the shooting, he did not say that. He did his best to bring the country together. And I thought, this is the divisive figure? This is the irresponsible person? No. This is the most responsible, unifying behavior of a leader I think I've ever seen.
Yeah. And Tucker ended his remarks last night saying, God is among us. God is among us. The latest of many speakers to notice the hand of God in the events of this week. All right. You know, we've come a long way, haven't we? Back in the 2020 election, Mark Zuckerberg spent a tremendous amount of cash to try and defeat Donald Trump. They call it Zuck Bucks for a reason. He was spending that money all across the country. And, well, take a listen to what he just told Bloomberg.
I've done some stuff personally in the past. I'm not planning on doing that this time. And that includes, not endorsing either of the candidates. Now, look, there's obviously a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. The historic events over over the weekend. And, on a personal note, it's, seeing Donald Trump get up after getting shot in the face and pump his fist in the air with the American flag is one of the most badass things I've ever seen in my life. But look, it's, and I think, look, it's, at some level as an American, it's like, hard to not get kind of emotional about that spirit and that fight. And I think that's why a lot of people like the guy.
Yeah. Strength, it turns out, wins people over, including Mark Zuckerberg, at least for now. That was his reaction. Let me get Chris in Charlotte in here, line 5. Chris, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Colonnade Show.
Hey, Vince. Thanks so much for putting me on.
Yes, sir.
I haven't heard a tremendous amount about this. I'm wondering if there's something out there. Just strictly speaking from a mathematical standpoint, the calculated odds of that bullet missing him the way that it did.
Yep.
If he turns his head just a fraction more, or is just a tiny, you remember that show Mythbusters used to have on Discovery? Like, you could not recreate that.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Yeah, amazing.
And I just don't know if anybody is putting time from a supercomputer or a physicist, whatever the odds are. If people need hope, just look at that.
Yeah, I was thinking the other day.
Recreate that.
I was thinking the other day, just in terms of where it hit him on the ear. I don't know how many degrees of wiggle room he might have in his neck turn, but it's got to be maybe 1 degree. That's about all the space he could have had. But that shot going through his ear like it did, and his head being in the position that it was. That is a 1 in a trillion arrangement, and somehow it happened.
Absolutely infinitesimal. You cannot calculate that. That could not happen again.
Yeah. It's just really remarkable, and aside of the providential nature of how everything went down, I think you're.
And like I said, there's a lot of people out there that struggle with faith and whatever else, but just take hope, go to church, say a prayer.
Amen.
God.
Amen. Yeah, amen, Chris. And we've heard, and I think I heard Donald Trump mention God's name this week more than I've heard him mention in a very long time. Haven't you? Is Chris there?
I guess. Yeah. Hey, you still there?
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
Interesting non-drinking game to play when the Democrats have their convention. See how many times they don't mention God or they don't mention patriotism.
It's going to be a lot. In fact, you'll drink yourself to death if that's the game you're playing. Remember, it was back in 2012 that Democrats had actually excluded God entirely from their platform at the Democrat convention. So this has been done before. They've been working on this for a while. Thank you, Chris. Excellent point. Excellent point. What did Tucker say? God is among us. No question. We've got a lot of headlines to come. They're trying to force Joe Biden out. They're threatening to go completely public. Nancy Pelosi is going to be yelling it over her dentures next week that Joe Biden has to go. We'll cover all the developments here on WMAL. Stay with us. The great one, Mark Levin, is up next.